So, hello everyone. This is Rosalyn R. Laniba, and now I will discuss to you all about American literature periods. So, let me show you the table of contents. So, the first is Native American, B. Puritan, C. Enlightenment or Revolutionary, D. Romanticism, E. Realism, F. Modern, and lastly, Contemporary. So, first, A is a Native American. The term Native American generally refers to the history and culture of the indigenous peoples of North America before the arrival of Europeans. So this period can be broken down into different eras based on the development of indigenous societies, their cultures, and their ways of life. Okay, so Native American. Much of the literature of this period is mythological. Most of Native American myths were written long before Europeans settled in North America. Like most cultural myths, these myths examine the creation, the nature of gods, and the natural world. Non-mythological writings of Native Americans often examine the relationship between Native American society and early European settlers and later the effect of United States political policies on Native American culture. And Scott, Mamadalis Liselko, and Louis Erdrich are all contemporary Native American writers that utilize Native American themes and experiences in their work. Okay, next, we have a letter B, the Puritan, in 1472 to 1750. The Puritan period in American history generally refers to the time when Puritan settlers played a significant role in shaping early colonial life, especially in the New England region. This period spans roughly from the early 16th to the late 16th and overlaps with the early stages of English colonization in America. Most of this is histories, journals, personal poems, sermons, and diaries. The literature is attitudes and the authority of the Bible and the church. We call it Puritan because the majority of the writers during this period were strongly influenced by Puritan ideals and values, especially the concept of predestination and sin. Puritan began as an insult by traditional and Anglicans to those who criticized or wished to purify the Church of England. Jonathan Edwards, William Bradford, and Anne Bradstreet are authors of this period. So this period still influences American concepts about God, money, and America as the promised land. Next, let's have the letter C, the Enlightenment or Revolutionary in 1750 to 1800. The Enlightenment and the Revolutionary periods in American history were pivotal in shaping the nation's intellectual, political, and social landscape. They both contributed to the development of the key ideals that influenced the founding of the United States. Enlightenment and the Revolutionary, called the Enlightenment period due to the influence of science and logic. This period is marked in U.S. literature by political writings and diverged from the religious focus of the Puritan era. Genres included political documents, speeches, and letters. There is a lack of emphasis and dependence on the Bible and more use of common sense or logic and science. Writings expanded the truths found in the Bible and did not necessarily divorce from the idea of God and spirituality. Okay, so let's have the letter D. Romanticism in 1800 to 1840. So Romanticism was an intellectual and artistic movement that emerged in the late 18th century and reached its peak in the early 19th century, especially in Europe and the United States. It was a reaction against the rationalism and strict rules of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Romanticism emphasized emotion, imagination, individualism, nature, and the sublime. So, Romanticism is a literary and artistic movement of the 19th century that arose in reaction against 18th century neoclassicism and the political focus of the Enlightenment. So, placing a premium on fancy, imagination, emotion, nature, individuality, human intuition, and exotica, it moved from personal and political documents to entertaining ones, which gave rise to short stories, poetry, and novels. Purely American topics were introduced, such as frontier life, manifest destiny, and individualism. Romantic elements can be found in the works of American writers as diverse as Cooper Poe, Thoreau and Emerson, Dickinson, Hawthorne, and Melville. Romanticism is particularly evident in the works of the New England transcendentalists. Okay, let's have the number one, transcendentalism in 1840 to 1855. Transcendentalism was a philosophical and literary movement that emerged in the early 19th century in the United States, primarily around the 1830s and 1840s. It was rooted in the belief that individuals could transcend the physical world and connect with a higher spiritual reality through intuition and personal experience. Transcendentalists were heavily influenced by Romanticism as well as Eastern philosophies and European idealism. The movement was particularly strong in New England, where it had a significant impact on American literature, philosophy, and social reform. So, Transcendentalism is an American literary and philosophical movement of the 19th century. The Transcendentalists, who were based in New England, believed that intuition and the individual conscience transcend experience and thus are better guides to truth than are the senses of logical reason. Influenced by Romanticism, the Transcendentalists respect the individual spirit and the natural world, believing that divinity is present everywhere, in nature and in each person. The Transcendentalists include Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Bronson Alcott, W. H. Channing Margaret Fuller, and Elizabeth Peabody. The anti-transcendentalists, Hawthorne and Melville, rebelled against the philosophy that man is basically good. A third group and fireside poets wrote about more practical aspects of life such as dying and patriotism. So next, let's have the number two, the Gothic. Gothic literature is a genre that emerged in the 18th century and became prominent in the 19th century, blending elements of romance, horror, and in supernatural. It is characterized by its dark, airy, and mysterious atmosphere, often featuring decaying settings, psychological terror, and themes of the unknown. Although it originated in England, Gothic literature had a significant impact in the United States, especially during the early 19th century. In Gothic, writers like Poe and Hawthorne responded to the optimistic vision of the Romantics with a darker vision. The Industrial Revolution brought ideas that the old ways of doing things are now irrelevant, and out of this came the exploration of the supernatural, being at the mercy of forces beyond human control, and the nature of good and evil. It is out of the Gothic writers that the contemporary genre of horror springs. Okay, next, let's have the letter E, the realism. The 1865 to 1915. Realism was a literary and artistic movement that emerged in the mid 19th century as a response to the exaggerated emotionalism and idealization of previous movements, such as Romanticism. Realism sought to portray life as it truly was, focusing on ordinary, everyday experiences rather than the dramatic, heroic, and fantastical themes often found in earlier works. Realist writers and artists aim to depict life with accuracy, objectivity, and attention to detail, often focusing on the lives of ordinary people and the challenges they face in society. Realism is the presentation in art of the details of actual life. Realism began during the 19th century and stressed the actual as opposed to the image or the fanciful. The realists tried to write truthfully and objectively about ordinary characters in ordinary situations. They reacted against Romanticism, rejecting heroic, adventurous, unusual, or unfamiliar subjects. American realism grew from the work of local color writers such as Bret Harty and Sarah Orne Jewett, and is evident in the writings of major figures such as Mark Twain and Henry James. Of number one, naturalism. Naturalism is a literary movement that emerged in the late 19th century as an extension of realism, but with a stronger emphasis of the influence of environment, heredity, and social conditions of human behavior. Naturalism adopts a scientific, almost deterministic view of life where individuals are shaped by forces beyond their control, such as biology, social environment, and the harsh realities of life. It focuses on depicting life with a scientific objectivity, often showcasing the darker, more brutal aspects of existence. An outgrowth of realism. Naturalism is a literary movement among novelists at the end of the 19th century and during the early decades of the 20th century. The naturalists tended to view people as helpless victims of immutable natural laws and the effects of heredity and environment on people helpless to change their situations. Early exponents of naturalism include Stephen Crane, Jack London, and Theodore Dreiser. Okay, number two, regionalism. Regionalism is a literary movement that emerged in the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, closely associated with realism and naturalism. It focuses on the depiction of specific regions of the country, highlighting their unique customs, dialects, landscapes, and ways of life. Regionalism aims to capture the essence of the particular geographic area, often focusing on rural settings and the lives of everyday people. This movement was particularly prominent during the time when the country was experiencing rapid industrialization and urbanization, and many writers sought to preserve the disappearing rural traditions and ways of life. So, regionalism, another outgrowth of realism, regionalism is in literature is the tendency among certain authors to write about specific geographical areas. Regional writers like Willa Cather and William Faulkner present the distinct culture of an area, including its speech, customs, beliefs, and history. Local color writing may be considered a type of regionalism, but regionalists, like the Southern writers of the 1920s, usually go beyond mere presentation of cultural idiosyncrasies and attempt instead a sophisticated sociological or anthropological treatment of the culture of a region. Next American literature period is the modern. The modern period, often referred to as modernism, generally refers to a cultural, artistic, and intellectual movement that emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was characterized by a deliberate break from traditional forms and styles, embracing innovation, new materials, and a focus on progress. So, modern in 1915 to 1946, the authors during this period raised all the great questions of life but offered no answers. Because modernism came about during an age of disillusionment, confusion, and major societal change. This period reacted to two world wars, the Great Depression and African American and women suffrage. Writers often examined self definition and new opportunity. So, in addition, because of the emancipation of slaves in the late 19th century and the adoption of the 14th and 15th Amendments, race became a more pronounced aspect of literature. Prejudice and stereotypes were often explored, even if only with a minor character. Also, because of the women's suffrage movement and the adoption of 19th Amendment, gender rules were often explored. Faulkner, Steinbeck, Fitzgerald, Hemingway, and Frost are all examples. Number one, Imagism. In 1912 to 1927. So, Imagism was a literary movement that emerged in the early 20th century, primarily in poetry. It was part of the broader modernist movement, but Imagism had its own distinct focus, emphasizing clarity, precision, and economy of language. The movement was particularly concerned with using vivid, direct images to convey emotion and meaning, rather than relying on metaphor, abstraction, or excessive ornamentation. Imagism was a literary movement that flourished between 1912 and 1927. Led by Ezra Pound and Amy Lowell, the Imagist poets rejected 19th century poetic forms and language. Instead, they wrote short poems that use ordinary language and free verse to create sharp, exact, and concentrated pictures. Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was a cultural, social, and artistic movement that took place during the 1920s, primarily in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City. It was a period of great intellectual, artistic, and literary activity by African Americans who sought to redefine their identity and assert their place in American society. The Harlem Renaissance was not just an artistic movement, but a response to racial discrimination, segregation, and the cultural invisibility of African Americans at the time. So, part of the modern age, the Harlem Renaissance, which occurred during the 1920s, was a time of African American artistic creativity centered in Harlem in New York City. Writers of the Harlem Renaissance include Countee Cullen, Claude Mackay, Jane Toomer, Langston Hughes, and Arnabon Temps. So we have the last period, the letter G, contemporary, in 1946 to the present. The contemporary period refers to the cultural, artistic, and intellectual movements that have shaped society from the mid 20th century to the present. It encompasses a broad range of developments in various fields such as literature, art, music, philosophy, and technology. This period is marked by rapid change, diversity of styles, and an exploration of new forms of expression. No clear philosophy identifies the present span of literature, but like the modernist movement, often explores personal experience and social change. Writers like J.D. Salinger, Beth Poet, Jack Kerouac, John Updike, Flannery O'Connor, Sylvia Plath, and Kurt Vonnegut Jr. represent the span of contemporary styles and works. Let's have the last postmodernism under the contemporary. So, postmodernism is a broad and complex intellectual, artistic, and cultural movement that emerged in the mid 20th century, particularly as a reaction against modernism and its ideas of progress, objectivity, and universal truths. Postmodernism is difficult to define because it encompasses a wide variety of approaches, but its core ideas are centered around skepticism, relativism, and rejection of grand narratives or totalizing theories. Writers of postmodernism often utilize absurd plots, lyrical style, elaborate symbolism, and narrative digression of fragmentation. Notable postmodern writers include Toni Morrison, Thomas Pynchon, Cormac McCarthy. And that's all. Thank you for listening.